Hello everyone, and welcome back to RM Collecting. Today I'm going to go through all the books in my book collection which are about the Medway Towns. These three here are just an example of some of the books. The book is this History of Rochester. It's written by Frederick Francis Smith, who was a former mayor of the city of Rochester. This book is quite good because it has a lot of old pictures and a lot of information about Rochester and its history. For those of you who don't know, the history of Rochester goes all the way back to the Roman times, and this book covers all of it, from the bridges to local charities and hospitals. It also goes over a lot of the history which isn't very well known. For example, the local trade and the city charters, which stretch all the way back to the Saxon period, as you can see there. This entire book has illustrations throughout it, and so it gives you an idea of what it's talking about and what Rochester would have looked like at the time. You can see the castle from the river. This picture shows the ruins of the old chapter house just next to the cathedral. And this picture shows the cathedral in 1810. Because this book was written by a former mayor and member of the Rochester City Council, the city's archives were used to create this book, and so it's very reliable and has many sources backing up all the information and facts given throughout the book. I personally think this book is very useful and interesting, especially if you live in Rochester or just like the history of Rochester, and I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who might be interested in those things. Next book is The History of Rochester Bridge. This was compiled by the actual trust which owns the bridge, and so it is again quite reliable because it uses loads of sources and information from the Rochester Bridge Trust archives, which stretch back hundreds of years. What many people don't actually realise is that Rochester Bridge has just as long as a history as the city of Rochester itself. The first bridge built in Rochester was actually built by the Romans, and ever since then there has been a bridge near to the site where the Romans built their first bridge. This book only covers the bridge's history from 1387 to 1856. This is because a new bridge was built in 1387 and it was then demolished in 1856, so it covers the history of the medieval bridge, which does stretch for most of Rochester Bridge history. Not only does this book tell you the history of the bridge, but it also tells you the history of the bridge chapel, bridge lands, and the income of the bridge, and many other things really. Yes, it gives you pictures to look at so you know what they're talking about and you can see it for yourself. This picture shows a plan of the manor of Nashadon, which was one of the bridge lands. Who may be confused about what I mean when I say the bridge lands, it was pretty much another form of income which the bridge warden would get and divert towards the bridge or other lands. So, in other words, it was lands that the bridge warden controlled. This book is very good because it tells you a part of Rochester history which is not very known. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who's interested in the history of Rochester or the River Medway. Now, my next three books are all written by the same author, Edwin Harris, as you can see there, and they're all about Rochester. Next book is a collection of booklets written by Edwin Harris. Edwin Harris was a local historian who wrote a lot about Dickens and the history around Rochester. If you are wanting to buy one of his books for research, you should know that he isn't the most reliable, as he doesn't always back up his information with sources. But from what I can tell, it seems a lot of his information which is wrong is quite obviously wrong. This book here has his Old Rochester series from number 1 to number 26. There are more though, I'm pretty sure it goes up to 28, and there is also another series called the Eastgate series, which covers history of other areas like Cobham and Chatham. The booklets in this book were written from about 1898 to mid-1920s, so it tells you a history from the perspective of an Edwardian historian, which I think is quite cool. These next two books are pretty similar. One's about Saxon Rochester and the other's about Roman Rochester. If you are going to buy these though, I will say that the cover picture is quite deceiving, as large parts of the book aren't actually about Rochester. For example, in this Saxon Rochester book, most of the book is actually just about Gundulph, and it's not actually about Rochester. It's only the last few chapters that are actually about Rochester. But overall, I think they are still good books and tell you a lot about history, really, from, again, the perspective of an Edwardian historian. All three of these books I would recommend to anyone interested in the history of Rochester. These two not too much, but they still do have facts about Rochester, which is quite cool. This next book is actually about Edwin Harris, and it tells you about his life as a historian and police officer, as you can see up there. And he had many different things going on in his life, which is quite cool. All about his life as a printer, a writer, a druid, a special constable, an antiquarian, and a Dickensian. It also gives you a list of a lot of his works. This is the Old Rochester series that I was talking about before, and this is the Eastgate series that I was talking about before. As you can see here on the back of the book, it's got a picture of the first Old Rochester booklet, which I showed you before. This book is still quite good, but it doesn't tell you as much of a history of Rochester as the other books that I've shown you have. It does have quite a lot to say about the life of somebody in Rochester though, and like the history about that he wrote about. Moving on from Edwin Harris, my next book is actually a very old book. It was written in 1817 by W. Wildash, and it's called The History and Antiquities of Rochester and its Environs. As you can see here, it's got an old map from 1816. I think this book is very cool because it tells you a history of Rochester from early 19th century historian. As you can see here, it tells you about loads of different parts of Rochester, including the cathedral and its bishops, the bridge, the castle, a lot of different charities, the free school, which I did a documentary on. It's the maths school now. the Town Hall, which is the Guild Hall, and city charters, which I'll speak about more later on. Now, my copy is quite damaged, as you can see here. The front cover's coming off, and so I was able to pick this up for a relatively cheap price. But if you was to get a good copy of this book in good condition, it is quite expensive because of its age. If you are able, though, to find a relatively cheap copy, or you're willing to spend a large amount of money, I would definitely recommend this book, purely because it's written a long time ago, and it's really telling the history of a place, even though the time it was written is considered as history now. So it's telling the story of Rochester from a historical point of view, really, which I think is very cool. My next book is this Rochester in Old Photographs book. Now, I'm only going to show you one of the old photographs book because I do have quite a few, but I personally recommend any old photographs book of the area because I think it's a visual way of learning. I won't spend too much time on this book, but if you are interested in the history of an area that you live in, these old photographs books I think are the best to learn about it. My next book is The City of Rochester Charters. Now, not many people really know about the City of Rochester Charters, but from about the 1100s up until the 1800s, Rochester got given many charters. If you don't know what a charter is, it's basically the monarch giving a city privileges. For example, this charter of 1461, granted by Edward IV, gave the city of Rochester the right to have a mayor and elections to elect a mayor each year. This book is definitely a good book if you're researching into the history of Rochester, or just want to find out more about how Rochester was given more rights over its history. My next book is this Secret Rochester book. I'm pretty sure there's also a Secret Chatham book, which I'd also recommend. This book tells you about the history of Rochester, which isn't very well known. For example, the secret funding of elections, or when James II spent his final days in England, which was in Rochester. It also has a lot of pictures in the book, so you can see what it's talking about. As you can see, here are some more pictures. Secret Rochester, along with Secret Chatham, which I don't have, unfortunately, I would definitely recommend, as you can learn some facts about Rochester and Chatham, which you might not be able to learn about anywhere else, in like museums and stuff, for example. This is all I'm going to do for this video. I will release a part 2 though, as I have some more books, mostly about Chatham. So I'll try and release that video as soon as possible. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.